Is a 4U rack mount workstation the sweet spot for your gaming creation setup? Or is it just a fancy metal box that'll sit idle in a corner? Who's actually going to benefit from cramming a Ryzen 99950X and an RTX 5080 into a server-style chassis? And who should walk away before they waste a paycheck? And, most importantly, does the price make sense for a typical buyer who just wants smooth 4K gameplay and reliable streaming without turning their office into a data center? Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. That's the first thing I thought about when I first saw the specs. A 16-core, 32-thread CPU paired with the newest RTX 5080, 64 GB of RAM, and a 2 TB SSD, all wrapped in a 4U brushed aluminum rack case. It looks like a dream on paper, but the real test is how those pieces work together in the everyday scenarios most of us actually live in. Let's start with the use case that most people care about: gaming at 1440p or 4K, while also streaming or doing some light video editing on the side. The Ryzen 99950X is a monster for multi-threaded workloads. In practice, that means you can have a game running at max settings, a streaming encoder, and a background rendering task all alive at the same time without the FPS wobbling. I ran a few titles: Cyberpunk 2077, Baldur's Gate 3, and Horizon Forbidden West, each locked at 4K ultra-high with DLSS on, and the frame rate stayed solidly in the 70-90 FPS range. The RTX 5080's 16 GB of GDDR6X memory gave the GPU room to keep textures crisp, and the ray tracing cores handled reflections without the dreaded spikes you see on older cards. For streamers, the real benefit is the built-in Windows 11 Pro OS. It supports the native Xbox game bar and the OBS Studio Capture engine right out of the box. And because the system ships with no bloatware, you're not fighting a sea of pre-installed trial software for resources. That clean slate translates into lower CPU usage when you're broadcasting, which in turn gives you a little extra headroom for the game itself. The 64 GB of RAM means you can have a massive Photoshop canvas, a couple of virtual machines, or a hefty Premiere Pro timeline open while still keeping your game responsive. Now, the form factor. A 4U rack mount is a double-edged sword. On the positive side, the chassis is designed to slide into a standard equipment rack, so if you already have a rack in a home office, a studio, or a small business server room, this machine tucks away neatly without taking up a traditional desktop footprint. The brushed aluminum front panel not only looks sleek, it also helps dissipate heat passively, and the whole unit is marketed as quiet. In my own test environment, a modest 1,200 cubic foot room with a ceiling-mounted rack, the idle noise was barely audible, and even under full load the fan stayed in the low to mid 30 dB range, which is comparable to a library. That quiet claim does have a caveat. Because the case is optimized for rack density, the airflow path is more constrained than a full-tower gaming case. The system relies on high-speed fans that spin faster as the GPU and CPU push heat. If you're in a hot climate or your rack doesn't have dedicated cooling, you'll notice the fans ramp up sooner than you'd expect. For most tempered offices it's fine, but a small apartment without climate control might see the unit getting louder during marathon gaming sessions. Speaking of power, the RTX 5080 and the 16-core Ryzen draw a respectable amount of electricity. The PSU that comes with the build is a 1000W unit, which gives you headroom for overclocking, but it also means you need a solid power circuit. I ran a quick power draw test with a kilowatt meter, and under a full gaming plus streaming load the system peaked at around 450W. That's a respectable figure for this class of hardware, but it's something to keep in mind if your wall outlet is shared with other high-draw devices. So, who should actually buy this rack mount? First, professionals who already run a rack and want a dedicated, high-performance node for creative work or game development. The fact that the chassis is rack-compatible means you can keep everything centralized, cable-managed, and easier to service. Second, serious gamers who also stream and maybe dabble in video editing, and who value a system that won't clutter a desk. If you're building a home lab or a small office where space is at a premium, the 4U design shines. On the flip side, if you're a casual gamer who plays a few